All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Wednesday webinar with the lovely Nancy Cairns. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording, so if you do not wish to be part of the recording, please feel free to turn off your camera. We do ask that during the presentation, you do keep yourself on mute, but during the question and discussion periods, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. If you do not feel comfortable doing so, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I can relay them to Nancy. Otherwise, Nancy, I'm going to hand it over to you and take it away.
Great, thank you. So, hi, my name is Nancy Cairns. I am the founder of Holistic Work Wellbeing, and I am a white woman in her late 30s. I'm wearing a black shirt and a brown suit jacket. I have black glasses on and auburn hair, lots of freckles. I would like to start off by recognizing that this webinar was created and is being presented on the traditional and unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and also that June is Indigenous History Month. So hopefully everyone is taking an opportunity to educate themselves and celebrate the Indigenous culture. So today we're talking about embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So we're going to be looking at what is it, why will it future-proof your organization, and how to get started. So the learning objectives today, we're going to be looking at diversity, specifically what is intersectionality and the concept of privilege. We're going to be looking at equity, the difference between equality and equity, and inclusion, factors for inclusion, and what does that, and belonging, what does that even mean? A lot of times these days, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're also talking about belonging, which is the result of having a workplace culture that includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we're going to be looking at the business case for it. So looking at data, surveys, that kind of thing. And then the process. So how do we overcome those barriers? How do we get started? And what are the next steps? And then I'm going to leave some time for questions, hopefully near the end. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? Oops. So right here, we're looking at what is called the wheel of power and influence. And I don't know, can you see my mouse on the screen or no?
Yeah, we can see your mouse.
Okay, awesome. So these are all different identities. And all of us, we are all unique people with different lived experiences. We come from different backgrounds and all of these different identities. So on the outside of this wheel, these are the more marginalized identities that exist in today's society. And as we move closer into the center of this wheel, that's where we're going to see identities that carry more power, more influence, and more privilege. And I would like to take a moment to recognize the word privilege because it can be triggering sometimes. Having privilege doesn't mean by any means that you haven't experienced hardships in life. What it means is those hardships haven't had to do with a particular identity. So for example, as an able-bodied woman, I never really accessibility needs were not really on my radar, not until I was a first-time mother on maternity leave, and I was trying to go out into the world with a stroller. And that's when I noticed, where are the ramps? Where are those push buttons so that I can actually get into the building? So that was a moment, an aha moment for me, where I recognized my own privilege in that I don't have to, that's not something I have to think about every day. And I have the choice whether I want to use a stroller or not. I can, carry the baby, right? Rather than there are people out there that they don't have a choice. They have to use all of those, everything that's out there for accessibility. So that's an example of where I would experience privilege. So moving on, I'm going to go through this power wheel and kind of show where I might experience some privilege, and other places where I might be a little bit more marginalized. And the point of that is to explain what intersectionality is. So basically intersectionality, and I'm really sorry, I have it written down in my notes, which I can't see right now. But I will get that. It was coined in 1989, and it was by a Black woman. She was a professor, and she wanted to, she did a whole paper for people to understand the intersectionality of Black women, and how they were experiencing racism and sexism at the same time, right?
Her name
So
was Kimberly Crenshaw.
thank you so much.
You're
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. So Kimberly Crenshaw was the one that coined the term
You're doing great.
intersectionality. And I think it's been very important because it recognizes people's different identities and how they might be more marginalized in some ways because they experience more marginalization from their different identities, or less so. There's places where you might experience more privilege and places where you might experience more marginalization. So moving on, I am heterosexual. So I experience privilege in that way. That means that I'm attracted to the opposite sex. I'm attracted to men. And I was just born this way. This is how I feel. I am attracted to men. That the difference between who I'm attracted to and what I identify as, when it comes to my gender, I am a cisgendered woman. So by cis, what that means is that I identify as what the gender that I assigned at birth. So because I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth, that makes me cis. So I'm a cisgendered woman. So I'm kind of like middle of the road in terms of the power and influence that I have. Cisgendered men have more influence, and then the most marginalized when it comes to gender is trans, intersex, and non-binary. So again, I identify with what I was born in versus somebody who, if they were born into the wrong body, that's just who they are, right? Just like we don't pick the color of our skin, we don't pick who we're attracted to or how we identify. But I wanted to make that distinction because I think sometimes people can mix up the difference between your sexuality and your gender. Those are two separate identities. Moving on, and this is something that I'm glad we're talking about more in society, and that is your neurodiversity. So I am neuroatypical. So I'm middle of the road again. And my brain, because I'm dyslexic, my brain works differently than like a neurotypical person does. And I still carry some privilege because even though I know internally that my brain is working differently than others, I have the ability to mask. I really, unless I disclose to people, they really don't know that I'm neuroatypical. Significant neurodivergence. Sometimes people can actually, they don't have to disclose that they're significantly neurodivergent. So they might experience being more marginalized in society as a result of that. Moving on to our mental health. So when you have robust mental health, again, you have more power and influence versus when you're experiencing vulnerability with your mental health. Body size. I mean, take a look at Hollywood magazines where things have gotten a lot better. There's been a lot of progress there, but still typically the wheel of power and influence, when it comes to how people are treated, how people are valued, it's slim is how people experience more power and influence in today's society. And I would say I'm like somewhere between average, yeah, probably average-ish on this wheel. So then on housing, I am again middle of the road, sheltered or renting. So I'm renting right now, but property owners are the ones that experience the most power and influence in our society, and then versus people that are unhoused. And then when it comes to wealth, I grew up middle class. So again, middle of the road, but the most rich, the wealthy, they're the ones that experience the most power and influence in this society, versus people that are low income. And then here in Canada, English is the first language. And so I carry, because English is my first language, I carry power and influence because English is my first language. And then somebody like my mom, who is Mexican and came here to Canada, she learned English. So she would be middle of the road here, versus somebody who doesn't speak any English, who comes here and still doesn't speak any English. They might have trouble finding employment opportunities, or even just getting around where they are because they don't speak the language. I've already covered this. And then again, talking about, this is kind of in the same realm as like the speaking English, is being a citizen. I am a Canadian citizen, and as a result of that, I experience more power, influence, and privilege than somebody who is undocumented. And my mother, again, she married a Canadian. She became a Canadian citizen. She's a documented immigrant, but she definitely experienced some barriers as somebody that wasn't born here in Canada. And I'm white, so I experience white privilege as a result of that. And then different shades experience less privilege. And then those that are very dark toned in their skin color experience the most marginalization. And moving on to your education. So I have a post-secondary education. So I am in that inner wheel of power as a result of that. More employment opportunities are there for me as somebody with a post-secondary education, versus somebody with a high school education. And I know that there are people that can start their own business and they can do very well for themselves. What I'm talking about more is like out there in the job market, you have more opportunity the more post-secondary education you have. And then in terms of elementary education, that's the most marginalized. And I looked it up earlier. It was like 1 in 6 people can't read here in Canada. So there's a large part of our population that experience marginalization because of their education. So this, I hope, kind of gives you an overview and an understanding of what intersectionality is. And I think that this is such a powerful tool to help reflect yourself. If you take a look at this this wheel of power and influence yourself, take a look at where you might hold more privilege, more power, more influence, versus maybe where you're feeling you might experience more marginalization. And it's all valid, right? And it's all important. And it also, all of these different identities in one place, it helps us understand just how diverse people can really be and how beautiful it is to see this amount of diversity in the world. It makes it such a dynamic place to be. And that is an amazing thing. So moving on, I want to talk about the difference between mainly between equity and equality. So we're going to start over here in the reality of today's world. So we've got this person here who's wearing a blue shirt. You can't see because they're standing on so many boxes here. And the purpose of this image is everyone is they're trying to see a baseball game, right? They're all trying to watch the baseball game. And this is something, an image you may have seen before. And I'm really sorry. I tried to find who to credit this to. I couldn't find it anywhere. So if anyone knows, just let me know and I'll add that to the slide. But so everyone is trying to see the baseball game. So this person here in the blue shirt that we can't see because they're so high up, they have so much opportunity that they're actually watching the game from like an eagle eye view, right? Then we have the person in the red. This person in the red, they have one box and they're doing just fine. They can see the game over the fence. And then we've got the person in the purple. Not only can they not see the game, but they're actually in a hole. And that's the reality of society today. Now, when we talk about equality, Equality means everyone gets the same thing, right? So that means everyone gets one box. So the person here in the blue, they have one box. They can see well over the fence. They're good. The person in the red, they can see with one box, they can see over the fence just fine. And then we have the person in the purple. They also have one box, but they still can't see the game, right? So yes, everyone got one box, but there's still somebody here left behind that can't actually see the game. So that's what equality means, is everyone gets the same, right? Now let's move over to equity. So equity, here we've got the person in blue. They don't have any boxes because they don't need any boxes. They are tall enough to see the game over the fence just fine. Then we've got the person in the middle with the red shirt with their one box. They're still doing great. They can see the game. And then now the person in the purple, now that they've received two boxes, which is what they need to be able to see the game, they're doing great. Now everyone is able to enjoy the baseball game together. And then I'm taking it one step further, and let's talk about when the barriers are removed. So the barrier being that fence, once it's removed, then nobody needs any boxes. Everyone can see the game just fine. So that is an explanation specifically hoping to distinguish between what equity is and equality. Now we're going to be talking about inclusion. So Kincentric, they conducted a global study, and they surveyed 5,000 employees, and they wanted to better understand what the experience of inclusion was. And these were the 4 themes that they identified after completing the survey of 5,000 employees. And this is on a global scale, okay? So the first one is that people are valued. So when people feel valued, they feel included. And I want you to think about a time in your life where maybe you feel like you're a part of a team, and what it's like when you feel like you're valued. Does that make you more engaged? Does that make you really bring your best foot forward to the table because you know, like, I am here, I am a part of this team, and I am valued, versus when you're in a situation where you don't feel like anything you do, like, it doesn't really matter in the end, right? That is a big distinction in terms of a feeling of engagement and psychological safety. And speaking of psychological safety, that really talks about this next point, which is when people feel enabled to use their voice. So I don't know if anyone's ever been in a situation where they're in a meeting and people are asking for ideas or what people think, and there's silence. That kind of speaks to a culture or an environment where people don't feel safe to actually speak their mind. So a place where there is inclusion, it's when people feel safe to say, oh, I have this idea, like, what do you think about this? And they're actually going to be heard and listened to, and it's going to go through a process, right? Or they feel safe to say, you know what, I don't know if that's going to work for A, B, C, D reasons. And then that's going to come like for a full discussion, and you're not going to get penalized for it, right? That's an inclusive environment. Another one is autonomy. When employees are given autonomy, when they have decision-making influence, especially when it comes to their own work, that really empowering employees, that really creates a sense of inclusion. And then as a result, employees and people just in general, they can contribute their best. So I'm going to be moving on to another slide. And in this next slide, we're going to be looking at exclusion, right? The opposite of this. So on this next slide, we're going to see numbers based on people who identified as part of these marginalized groups, what their feelings were of exclusion. So of the 5,000 people that completed this survey, the ones that identified as having a disability, 94% of them experienced at least one form of exclusion. 85% felt singled out, 69% felt devalued, and 43% felt dismissed. So an example of excluding somebody who has a disability might be holding a team meeting or like a team party or celebration at a bowling alley or laser tag. There might be people. My screen went black. Hello? So an example of excluding somebody with a disability would be, again, laser tag. So maybe not everyone can participate in laser tag. So having different options so that nobody feels excluded. Okay, so moving on. Somebody who identifies as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So 92% of people who identified as part of that community had experienced at least one type of of exclusion. And then 82% felt devalued, 82% felt singled out, 66% felt devalued, and then 44% felt dismissed or penalized. So an example of exclusion, or again, psychological safety, like maybe a member of that community doesn't feel safe to disclose that they're part of that community. I think sometimes when it comes to to DEI work, what can happen sometimes is if somebody identifies as part of one of these marginalized communities, they can get tapped and tokenized as a result of that. So to avoid that altogether, they may not feel safe because the culture isn't there. The culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, it doesn't feel safe for them to actually come out and identify themselves out of fear of being tokenized or bullying, harassment, that kind of thing. For non-binary, gender non-conforming, genderqueer, and trans, 96% felt that they experienced at least one type of exclusion. 80% felt singled out. 70% felt devalued, and 57% felt dismissed or penalized. And an example of that in the workplace could be bathrooms, washrooms, and feeling nervous about which washroom to use, or for trans men who still have their period, they could have their little monthly surprise appear, and then they can't access what they need, the products that they need in the washroom that they identify with. So that's an example of exclusion. Has primary caregiving responsibilities. So of the people that identified as that, 82% experienced at least one type of exclusion, 66% felt singled out, 58% felt devalued, and 38% felt dismissed or penalized. And I'd like to point out that primary caregiving responsibilities can also mean we typically think about like people with young children, but that can also mean having like a sick relative or an elderly relative that we're primarily taking care of. And there are people out there that are experiencing it on both ends. They might have young children and they're also taking care of their children. So being mindful of that. An example of excluding people, primary caregivers, is only having like networking opportunities after work hours, like people who have to be home to take care of their children or to go help feed their folks if they're in a home. They will get excluded because they won't have the opportunity to go after work hours. So just being mindful of that. And then income below current needs. So people who identified as having less income. 83% of them experienced at least one type of exclusion. 64% of them felt singled out or overtly mistreated. 60% felt devalued, and 33% felt dismissed. So examples of this could mean that all they can do is they don't have a car, so they can only take public transit, and maybe the hours don't align with public transit, so they get penalized because they're late, but really the bus was late, you know. So that is a way that people below income below their current needs, that is a way that they can be excluded. And after this, when I'm not sharing my screen anymore, I'm going to put the study, because I found it really interesting. I'm going to put it in the chat so everyone can have a chance to take a look at it. In the study, I didn't include this as one of the slides as well, but I think it's important to note that everyone probably has experienced some type of exclusion in their life. And people who identified as white also said that they had experienced some type of exclusion, but it was at a much lower rate. I had the rates written down in my notes, which I unfortunately can't see right now. So, but it was around like 50%, 30%, which is still, when it came to feeling singled out, I think it was 50%. Please don't quote me on that. But which is significant, but when you compare it to 85%, 82%, 80%, there is a substantial difference. So yes, everyone can feel a sense of exclusion, but the point I'm trying to make is people in these marginalized communities or that have these identities, they experience this exclusion at a disproportionate rate. So next, I would like to talk about belonging. So when we have a work environment, a work culture that embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion, what results is a feeling of belonging. And when you feel a sense of belonging, at least for me, that's when I feel the most creative. That's when I feel the most collaborative. Like I can really think about being innovative. When I feel a sense of belonging, when I feel safe, when I feel valued, that's when the magic really happens. And I'm going to quote Brene Brown here. And this really resonated with me because I know I've spent a lot of my life doing the opposite of belonging. And so the opposite of belonging is fitting in, because fitting in is assessing a group of people and thinking, what do I need to be? What do I need to say? What do I need to wear? How do I need to act? And changing who you are. True belonging never asks us to change who we are. It demands that we be who we are. And that, I think, is a great way to really help people understand that sense of belonging and how often are people showing up at work and compartmentalizing themselves to fit in. And then as a result, are you really bringing your best self forward? And DEI helps people, it empowers people, it empowers workforces to bring their best foot forward because they feel that sense of belonging. So why should organizations invest in DEI? Well, there are some workforce factors that are pretty big. 60% of candidates would decline a job offer at a company that doesn't value diversity. So that's huge. That's a huge piece of the job market that organizations that haven't embraced DEI are losing. Right? 39% have turned down or decided not to pursue a job opportunity because of a perceived lack of inclusion. So again, that's a big chunk of people who really value diversity, equity, and inclusion of the workforce. And then 44% of employees said they experienced a lot of stress the day before. So the reason why I included that is because it speaks to the inclusion piece and to me, the psychological safety piece of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When people are feeling stressed out, and the work environment could be part of the reason why, we need to take a look at that in a serious way, because that's almost half of employees saying that they had a stressful day the day before. That's a lot. That's a lot. And that can lead to like an en masse burnout of an entire workforce. And then speaking of the workforce, I'd like to point out that according to a 2021 census study, millennials and Gen Z make up just over 50% of the working age population. So the up and coming workforce, 77% of Gen Z and 47% of millennials believe that a company's level of diversity affects their decision to work there. So this is something that's very important to Gen Z and millennials, and they're the up and coming workforce. And if you take a look at those 77% and 47%, that's kind of like like the median is 60%, right? Of these candidates that we looked at with the other statistic there. And then just another one in 3 workers currently are millennials. So, and millennials are very value driven. Like they want to feel like they're showing up for work. I'm generalizing here, but a lot of millennials, they want to feel like what they're doing is contributing some sort of value to society. This idea of it's just a job doesn't resonate the same way with millennials as it did with previous generations. And then some of the benefits of DEI. So when leadership prioritizes DEI, they are twice as likely to exceed their financial goals. They're 6 times better at anticipating and responding to change. And what that means is leadership that prioritizes DEI builds a more resilient workforce, which is so important. And we saw how important that was during the pandemic when the world came to a halt and we all had to pivot, right? The buzzword of the pandemic was definitely pivot. And then also they generate 30% more revenue per employee. So if money is a factor, there you go, 30% more revenue for every employee that you have when you embrace DEI as part of your workplace culture. And then looking at this purple one here, when it comes to demographics, ethnically diverse companies and gender diverse companies are 36% more likely to financially outperform their competitors, other organizations. And that's when it comes to the shareholders' perspective. And a lot of these bigger companies, they love to keep their shareholders happy. So that's a good one to have in your back pocket. So where do we start? Well, we could be feeling a sense of overwhelm. When it comes to overcoming this barrier, what we can do is sit down, do a strategic meeting, and kind of plan out a mission statement. What kind of organization do we want to be? And then work backwards from there. And it's totally natural to feel like, oh, which marginalized community do we prioritize? Where do we start? Are we going to offend anyone? We don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to be doing this wrong, right? Especially when you're well-intended. So that moves into the next piece, which is understanding. So understanding what DEI actually is and the value that it brings to an organization. And by doing that, the budget and resources will hopefully appear, because a lot of times DEI, unfortunately, is relegated to like off the side of people's desks, and it shouldn't be there. It should be a strategic priority. It needs to be a strategic priority that has dedicated resources and budget, so that it can be transitioned into the being integrated as part of like the day-to-day operations of an organization. But first, it has to start as a project. It needs to be project managed. It's a change management project. But once you get through that project and it's integrated into your policies, into your hiring practices, into like your daily operations, that's going to make a world of difference. And you'll see it in employee engagement. You'll see it in employee productivity. There will be huge changes, but it's that understanding of why this is important and why this isn't just some fluffy, nice to have sort of initiative. This is an economically viable future proofing of an organization. So how do you do it? Leadership support is key. And I say that because if we have a strong sponsor that is behind DEI, that can go to bat, remove barriers, find that budget, and model the behavior. What leadership needs to be modeling the behavior, the DEI behaviors, so that their employees feel safe to do the same, feel safe to show up as their authentic selves. Leadership needs to be bought in. They are the key, and that is done with training and education. So again, helping them understand the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, training in unconscious bias, understanding microaggressions, conflict resolution training, and bringing in people from marginalized communities who can speak to their lived experiences, help people understand why it's important to include them into the fold, and integrating DEI into your culture. I was speaking about that a little bit in the previous slide, but this truly is so important. It needs to be integrated into the day-to-day. Like, this is just like putting your shoes on. You know, it's part of the culture. It can't just be a once a year doing a training session on DEI kind of thing, or just putting out the odd, happy Pride Month, and then that's it. But it's not actually part of the day-to-day culture. It's so important that it be fully and completely embraced. And then also understanding the value of the investment. Everyone's very concerned about return on investment, and they want to see that return on investment right away. And understanding that this is going to take time. This is a change. We're talking about a full shift, a full culture change, and that's going to take time, but it will pay off in the end if it's done right, if the buy-in is there from the very beginning, and it's completely followed up on every step of the way. There's two-way communication. It can be done, and it's very valuable, but it's going to take time, and understanding that is super important. And then, so next steps, build a business case. Hopefully you can use some of what I talked about today to help build that business case. You can look at your own HR data, look at stuff like your sick leave, your productivity rates, that kind of thing. You can complete an assessment of the current state through employee surveys. And it's super, super important that you report back on that employee survey. People need to know that you're actually listening. So if you complete an employee survey, you respond back and you say, this is what we heard and this is what we're going to do about it. If not, if engagement is already low on this employee survey, I promise you it'll be even lower on your next survey if they don't hear back. Like, just think about when you complete a survey. If you're not going to hear back about what happens, like, are you going to be filling it out? Are you going to take the time to fill it out? And then co-designing a path towards your future state together is super important. So having everyone at the table, that's frontline staff, managers, HR, the senior leadership, having everyone at the table and working together to create this future state. And you can start right now. So I was on a DEI panel not too long ago, and somebody was talking about how just on their team, they started like a swear jar type of thing, but instead of for swearing, it was for saying guys. So every time somebody said guys, they had to put money into the swear jar. And it was a great way to kind of get people thinking about the language that they're using, because that was all about inclusive language. So looking for alternatives like, hey everyone, or hey folks, instead of using guys, because guys is something that I think it's part of our day-to-day, like societally, we've just been programmed to use that. So it helped with that shift. And then it was also a fun thing, like that money could go towards buying, lunch for the whole team one day, that kind of thing. So that's an example of one of those organic initiatives that you could start in your own workplace, and it could have a ripple effect. Because if managers start to take notice, oh, this team is really collaborating, they're really getting along, like sick leave is really low in this particular team, like what are they doing? Oh, they're taking DEI initiatives, and they've started doing that on their own. Maybe we should take a look at that on a more strategic level here in senior leadership, you know, like it does matter. It does impact. And honestly, the organic stuff is what's really going to help make DEI grow. And it absolutely needs to. It is the future as far as I'm concerned. That is my opinion. DEI is the future. It leads to innovation. It leads to creativity. It leads to psychological safety, which is so important in the workplace. I think we talk a lot about physical safety, which is also very important, but understanding the importance of psychological safety in the workplace. Like, I think the statistic is we spend about a third of our life working. So ensuring that that workspace, that environment is somewhere that is a place where you can really be nurtured and grow, I think is a very positive thing. So moving on to questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for coming.
There we go. So there's Nancy's LinkedIn there in the chat there real quick. You can also reach out to her via LinkedIn. But thank you again, everybody, so much for coming. Thank you so much, Nancy. And we hope the rest of you have an amazing day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.